Trapped his entire life, this German Shepherd is finally rescued, and his reaction will make you cry. In a small, remote town in America, there was an old house covered in dust and spiderwebs. The house stood at the end of a quiet road, a place no one dared to go near. People in the town whispered that it was cursed. Deep inside the house, in the darkest corner of the basement, a German Shepherd named Max lived silently. Max was locked in a small, rusty cage. The cage was so tight that he could not stand up straight or turn around. Around him was thick darkness, with only a few weak rays of light slipping through the cracks of a rotting wooden door. Max couldn't remember how long he had been there. Maybe since he was a tiny puppy with round eyes full of hope. His owner, a tall man with a cold voice, had locked him in and then disappeared. That day, Max heard the key turn in the lock, the sound of footsteps fading away, and then silence. He waited and waited, but no one came back. Food ran out, and water was just a few drops left from the leaking roof. Max learned to live with hunger and loneliness that ate at him every day. Sometimes Max heard strange noises. The wind whistled through the door cracks, like it was telling a story he could not understand. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, then stopped. Once, he heard something scratching the wall, maybe a rat or something scarier. Max didn't know. He just curled deeper into the corner of the cage, his ears trembling. His fur grew long, tangled with mud and dust. His once bright eyes dimmed, like a lamp about to go out. But the strangest thing was another sound. Sometimes on the coldest nights, Max heard a soft moan, faint and unclear. Was someone else in the house? Or was it just an echo of his own voice? Max didn't dare bark because he was afraid. Afraid that if he made a sound, something in the darkness would come for him. He just lay still, breathing quietly, waiting for something, maybe a miracle or just an end to this trapped life. Max didn't know what the world outside was like. He didn't know what sunlight looked like. And he didn't know that, in that darkness, his fate was quietly changing. Max grew up in a tiny, cold cage in the basement of the old house. The cage was so small that he could not stretch his legs or lift his head high. His fur grew long, tangled, and covered with dust and dried mud. His once bright eyes slowly dimmed, like an oil lamp running out of fuel in the dark night. He didn't remember how long he had been there anymore. Maybe a few months or a few years. Time passed like a nightmare with no end. Max had very little food. Sometimes a dry piece of bread fell through the broken window and rolled onto the floor. He had to use all his strength to reach it, claws scraping the rotting wood. Once he found a piece of spoiled meat, stinking badly. He gobbled it up, even though his stomach hurt for days afterward. Water was even rarer. Max had to lick the drops that stuck to the walls whenever rain slipped through the cracks. His legs grew weaker, trembling every time he tried to stand. But deep inside, Max held on to a small dream to run and play in a big field he had never seen. The long, endless days weren't just about hunger and thirst. Sometimes Max heard strange noises in the house. The wood creaked, like someone was walking on the floor. The wind whistled through the door cracks, carrying a wet, fishy smell. One time he heard a low growl from far away, not like a dog's, not like a person's. Max curled into the corner of the cage, his heart pounding. Was something else in the house with him? Or was it just the imagination of a dog nearing exhaustion? At night, things got even scarier. The faint moonlight shone through the window, casting strange black shadows on the walls. One night, Max saw a long shadow, like a human hand, moving slowly. He didn't dare look long, just lowered his head and trembled. Max didn't bark anymore. He used to bark loudly, hoping someone would hear. But no one came. His voice was now hoarse and weak, like the sound of wind blowing through dry leaves. But the strangest thing was one morning, Max heard a small clattering sound, like someone placing something on the floor upstairs. Then there was a whisper, very soft, very far away. Was someone talking? Or was it just his imagination? Max lifted his head, ears perked up, but the sound disappeared quickly. He wondered, was someone coming closer? Or was it just another trick of fate? Max didn't know. He only knew that, in this cage, every day was like a challenge to survive and a question he didn't dare answer. Would freedom ever come? One cold winter morning, Max lay curled up in the tiny cage in the basement. The icy wind whistled through the door cracks, carrying a freezing breath. Suddenly, Max jolted awake. His ears stood up, trembling. A strange noise echoed through the old house. It wasn't the familiar wind or the distant chirping of birds he often heard. These were footsteps, heavy, slow, like someone walking on the rotting wooden floor upstairs. Max raised his head, his blurry eyes peering into the darkness. The footsteps grew clearer. Thump, thump. Each step sounded like a drumbeat in his chest. The floor creaked and groaned, as if it might collapse. Max shrank deeper into the corner of the cage, his heart racing. Who was there? Was it his old owner, back after years of abandonment? Or something scarier, something he had heard in the dark nights? Then the noise stopped. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Max didn't dare breathe hard. He waited, ears straining to listen. Suddenly a new sound came, dash metal scraping against metal, a cold, clinking noise. Was someone holding a key? Or a sharp knife? Max didn't know. He just felt the fur on his back stand up, his instincts screaming that something was about to happen. All of a sudden, a loud bang exploded, boom, like someone kicked the old door upstairs hard. Max jumped, his claws scraping the wooden floor. Dust rattled down from the ceiling, settling on his fur. Then the footsteps came again, faster this time, closer. They moved toward the stairs, leading down to the basement. Max heard the wood squeak under each step. Someone was coming down, coming to him. But then, another sound broke through. A voice, very soft, like a whisper. Max couldn't understand the words, but the voice wasn't cold like his old owner's. It carried a bit of warmth, yet it was full of tension. Was it one person? Or more? What were they here for? To save him, or to end his miserable days in some other way? Max trembled, not daring to bark. He just stared at the basement door, where faint light flickered. The footsteps stopped right outside. A long, blurry shadow appeared under the crack. What was waiting for Max on the other side? The basement door creaked, slowly opening. Max shrank back in his cage, his blurry eyes fixed on the darkness. A blinding flood of light suddenly poured in, stabbing into eyes used to shadows. Max shut them tight, shaking. The footsteps sounded again, closer than ever. Thump, thump. Then a figure appeared, tall, wearing a thick coat and a wool hat. It was a woman, but Max did not know that. He only felt fear. The woman stopped in front of the rusty cage. She froze, her eyes wide with shock. Max heard her gasp, like she could not believe what she saw. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. Max didn't understand her words. He just huddled deeper into the corner, his fur bristling. Was she here to hurt him? Or was she another person like his old owner, bringing coldness and abandonment? She knelt down, slowly reaching toward the cage. Max heard a clank. She was trying to open the lock. But the lock was rusted shut, unmoving. She muttered something, then pulled a small metal object from her coat pocket. The sound of metal scraping metal rang out, sharp and cold. Max shook harder. Was it a knife? Or something even more dangerous? He didn't know. He wanted to hide, but there was nowhere to go. Then came a loud click. The cage door swung open. Max flinched, his claws scratching the floor. The woman leaned in, reaching inside. Max bared his teeth, letting out a low growl, the first sound he had made in years. But she didn't pull back. Her hand touched his head, gentle and warm. Max froze in surprise. No pain, no cold, just warmth spreading through his dirty fur. "Don't be afraid," she said, her voice soft. Max didn't understand her words, but he felt something different. She leaned closer, looking into his eyes. Her eyes sparkled, like she might cry. Max didn't know why. Was she sad or angry? And who was she? From far off, Max heard something dash car engines, someone calling her name. Was she not alone? What did they want with a dog like him? The woman sighed, then gently pulled Max out of the cage. Max struggled weakly, his trembling legs unable to stand. Light from the basement window poured in, brighter than ever. Max closed his eyes, his head spinning. For the first time in years, he felt space bigger than the cramped cage. But what would happen next? Was this woman his savior or just the start of another nightmare? Max didn't dare trust, and neither could the reader guess. The woman carefully lifted Max from the cold basement floor. Max shook in her arms, his body light from hunger and weakness. His legs dangled, claws scraping feebly at the air. She climbed the old wooden stairs slowly, each step creaking like it might break. Max heard the wind grow stronger, the rustling of leaves coming from somewhere. Then a blinding light hit him, the real sun, the first he had ever seen. Max shut his eyes tight, his mind reeling. What was this? Where was he? She set Max down in the backyard of the house. The ground was covered in patchy grass, wet with morning dew. Max smelled dirt, grass, and fresh air, things so strange to him. He opened his eyes, looking around slowly. Tall trees stood ahead, golden leaves falling in the breeze. Far off, a small road led to a hazy unknown. Max tilted his head up, seeing a vast blue sky stretching endlessly. But then he ducked down, tucking his head into his front paws. He was scared of the light, scared of this big space. After years in a dark cage, freedom felt overwhelming. The woman knelt beside him, stroking his fur gently. "It is okay," she said, her voice soft. But Max didn't understand. He heard a strange noise from far away, dash an engine roaring, then a short honk echoing. Was a car coming? Who was coming? Max lifted his head, ears perked. A white car appeared at the end of the road, dust swirling around it. The woman stood up, waving toward it. Max trembled. Were they here to take him somewhere? Or lock him up again? The car door opened. Two men stepped out wearing coats like the woman's. They carried a big silver box, shining in the sunlight. Max bared his teeth, growling softly. What was that box? A new cage? He didn't want to go back to the dark. The woman turned to Max, resting her hand on his head to calm him. But then one of the men shouted, "Hurry, it is going to rain." His voice was urgent, tense. Max flinched. What was rain? And why were they rushing? The sky suddenly darkened. Black clouds rolled in fast, blocking the sun. The wind picked up, tossing leaves everywhere. Max felt cold drops of water land on his fur. He shook hard, not knowing what was happening. The woman bent down, hugging Max. "Don't be afraid," she said, but her voice trembled too. Was she scared, or was something dangerous coming? Thunder rumbled in the distance, like the growl of a giant beast. Max curled up, heart pounding. Freedom had just arrived, but what did it bring? A new start or another nightmare waiting ahead? Black clouds covered the sky, and strong winds whipped leaves around the backyard of the old house. Max sat on the ground, his fur wet from a few raindrops starting to fall. The woman knelt beside him, gently stroking his head. "It is okay, little guy," she said, her voice soft but shaky. Max looked at her, his blurry eyes full of doubt. He didn't know who she was or where he was. Thunder rumbled, each boom hitting his heart like a punch. Max trembled but didn't move. Two men from the white car came closer, carrying the big silver box. They set it down a few steps from Max. One of them opened the lid, a sharp click sounded. What was inside? Max smelled something strange. Not food, not danger, but something he'd never known. He lowered his head, ears drooping. Were they going to trap him in it? Or was something else waiting? The woman reached out, stroking his fur again. "Come on, you will be safe," she said, forcing a smile. But Max didn't wag his tail or jump like other happy dogs. He sat still like a statue. Then something strange happened. His eyes glistened, water pooling in them. A tear fell, rolling through his dirty fur. Then another. Max was crying. No barking, no whining, just silent tears streaming from his cloudy eyes. The woman flinched, her hand freezing on Max's head. "Oh my," she whispered, her voice choking. Tears rolled down her cheeks, too. The two men nearby stopped talking, staring at Max in shock. Is he really crying?" one asked, his voice full of disbelief. But Max didn't care. He stayed still, tears falling steadily, like all the years of pain were spilling out at once. Why was he crying? Was it joy from freedom or fear of what was coming? Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from far away, dash a tree falling in the fierce wind. Everyone jumped, looking toward the forest. Rain poured down, heavy and cold. The woman quickly hugged Max, shielding him from the rain. "Hurry, get to the car." They ran toward the car, but Max did not move. He sat there in the rain, tears mixing with the water. The woman turned back, yelling, "Max, come on!" But Max just lifted his head, looking at her with wet eyes. What was he thinking? What did he want? Thunder roared again, closer now, like a sign of something big about to happen. The rain grew heavier, blurring everything. The woman ran back, holding Max tightly, her tears mixing with the rain. "We have to go," she whispered, her voice full of worry. Was she afraid Max would not move, or scared of something in the storm? Max stayed silent, tears still falling. No one could predict his reaction. No one knew if this was the start of happiness or a hint of a deeper mystery waiting ahead. Rain poured like a waterfall, wind howling through the backyard of the old house. The woman held Max tight, rain soaking them both. "Let us go, Max," she shouted, her voice cutting through the thunder. The men rushed to open the white car's doors, leaving the silver box behind, glinting in the downpour. Max shook, his weak legs barely holding him. The woman scooped him up, running fast to the car. The door slammed shut, the engine roared. The car sped off, leaving the abandoned house in darkness and the raging storm. But what lay ahead for Max? They took Max to a rescue center in a big city, hours away from the small town. When the car stopped, the rain had eased, but the sky was still gray and heavy. Max was brought into a bright room, the air tinged with the smell of disinfectant. People in white coats gathered around him. They bathed Max, trimmed his tangled fur, and gave him fragrant chicken to eat. Max smelled the food, but he did not eat right away. He sat still, looking around with blurry eyes. Who were these people? What did they want from him? Was this all just a dream? Day by day, Max got used to the place. The woman whose name he now knew was Sarah visited often. She brought toys, petted him, and spoke in a gentle voice. Max started to trust her, but something still felt odd. Sometimes he heard a strange hissing sound from a room next to the center, like machines, or maybe an animal. One night, Max saw a green light flash through the door crack, along with someone whispering. Was there a secret here? Did this center just save dogs, or was it doing something else? After a few months, a family came to adopt Max. They were an older couple living in a peaceful suburb. On the day he left the center, Sarah knelt in front of Max, stroking his head one last time. "Live well, okay," she said, her eyes shining. Max looked at her, no longer crying. He wagged his tail lightly for the first time in his life. But as he stepped into the new family's car, Max turned back. He saw Sarah standing there watching him, and a strange man beside her holding the old silver box. They were saying something, but Max could not hear. That box was back. What was inside it? And why did Sarah look so worried? The car drove off, taking Max to his new home. There, he had a big yard to run in, a warm bed to sleep on, and plenty of food every day. His new family loved him, calling him Brave Buddy. But sometimes, on quiet nights, Max sat in the yard, looking up at the sky. He remembered the wind whistling through the old house, Sarah's eyes, and the mysterious silver box. His trapped life was over, but was his story really finished? Or was something still waiting, hidden in these peaceful days? A dog barked in the distance. Max tilted his head, ears perked. Was it just a neighbor's dog? Or a sign of a new mystery? No one knew, not even Max. His journey had just begun, but what lay ahead, light or more darkness, only time would tell. Thank you all for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the best stories. See you in the next one.